Alright everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be discussing the recent and ongoing major crisis that is unfolding in West Africa. Now this has been a situation that has been developing and unfolding for well over a week. Perhaps even months if you include Sudan and the East Africa crisis that is also ongoing. But today we're primarily going to be focusing on West Africa because there has been a pretty major situation that has unfolded last week in the nation of Niger. Now I intended on covering this story a little bit earlier, around the time as it was actually happening, but as time went on and we were kind of, inching closer to this deadline that was set up by ECOWAS, that I will get into in a second, I wanted to wait and see what was exactly going to come out and what was exactly going to happen before talking. And now that this deadline has passed and the time to see if ECOWAS was actually serious about their claims is here, I feel like it may be a little bit more appropriate to talk about this situation that is currently unfolding in West Africa. So if you haven't already seen the news recently, there has been a massive situation unfolding in West Africa. Last week, Niger went through a military coup in which an armed militia ousted their sitting president. I believe, if I remember correctly, he's like one of their first ever democratically elected presidents of that country. And supposedly this president was like a pro-French, Western type of leader who was democratically elected and is running the country. And so what happened last week? There was a pro-Russian, Eastern Bloc aligned anti-French military junta who went in and overthrew the government there, and this junta who staged this coup were able to detain that president, and he is currently being held under custody by this military junta who ended up successfully staging this military coup. Now, this is not the first time a military coup was attempted in Niger. In fact, this isn't even the first coup that happened in Niger. Not a lot of people know that much about the sociopolitics that goes on in Africa, and not that many people are aware of what's going on in Africa unless they heavily study the history of the sociopolitics in Africa or are really into sociopolitics in general. There was an attempt just recently, a couple years ago, there was a coup attempt that happened in Niger, although it was unsuccessful. And around that same time, Mali and Burkina Faso also went through successful coups in their own right and are still under those military regimes. I believe Guinea also went through a military coup as well, if I remember correctly. The number of civil wars and breakups and military coups that have been going on within Africa, the list of that is pretty lengthy, so Africa really is no stranger to this kind of stuff happening almost on a regular basis. And there really isn't that many people who are aware of it because a lot of the times they don't really study history or sociopolitics that much. But this recent military coup in Niger is a pretty big and serious one, and there is pretty much a chance that this could lead to even more problems in West Africa in general. For starters, the government that was ousted by this military coup was a pro-French government and a more Western-aligned government, so to speak. And this military junta is more Eastern Bloc aligned, so you may have seen videos of them on Twitter waving the Russian flag and whatnot. I would assume that past colonialism within Africa may have something to do with it, since the whole colonization scramble of Africa has left a bad taste in some people's mouth, and really, if you look back in history, I do not blame them. So you can generally see why these coups happen. A lot of them when it's like a pro-French government that is running over them. A lot of the anti-French guerrilla factions always stage these coups, and this has been going on in Niger since they declared their independence from France, by the way. That's basically what just happened in Niger, and its leader has assumed total control with the nation, essentially turning Niger from a democratic republic to an authoritarian military dictatorship. Now, Niger is part of an economic union within West Africa, known as the Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS for short. Now, ECOWAS is more of a pro-democracy type of union within West Africa. The best I can describe it's like the EU and the NATO of West Africa. You know, it's an economic alliance primarily. They essentially band together into one union and work together, and they all have very, very close political ties with one another. So that's essentially what ECOWAS is. It's a Western African Union, so to speak. Now, ECOWAS sees this coup as a very big concern. And with this recent military coup in Niger, they have been very harsh towards Niger about this whole coup that they just experienced. And they gave the military faction that overthrew and ousted the president 1 week to release the president, or they will face serious fucking consequences. Now, ECOWAS did give this illegitimate Niger government a specific deadline to release this president, and ECOWAS has threatened Niger that there will be serious consequences if the president isn't released from his custody by that specific deadline, if it had already passed. Some have even suggested that ECOWAS could full out invade Niger, and we could end up having like a World War II-like situation where all of these countries end up getting involved as a result just to assess with the situation. Now, there are 15 members of ECOWAS, which includes Nigeria, Benin, Togo, Ghana, Liberia, Guinea, Cabo Verde, Senegal, the Gambia, and many others. I can pretty much list every single country that is a member of ECOWAS. Not many people can even point any of these countries on a map. So if ECOWAS were to invade Niger, all of those countries would be involved as well. So link in the description, archived of course. ECOWAS had officially put the military coup that has ousted and overthrown the president and taken over the country on notice that if the president is not restored to power within a specific deadline, they're going to invade potentially. Now, as of recording, that deadline to basically oust this fucking military coup is over. It's over. It's past. The day that it was supposed to happen is past. Like, it already happened before, like 2 or 3 days ago. So now we're not really sure what's going to happen next and what ECOWAS has in store next. It's only been a few days since this deadline has passed, so anything realistically can happen. We'll see what happens next. But an invasion and possible foreign intervention does seem possible. My thoughts essentially is they're more than likely to essentially punt on the issue and continue talks, and it will drag on because this has actually been done before. They have actually intervened diplomatically in parts of Africa at other times, like in Mali, for example, and Burkina Faso, and even in Guinea. Normally, it leads to promises of reform that never end up happening. And years later, they're still waiting to allow them back on the alliance because they've been suspended. Burkina Faso and Mali. I think the only time where they legitimately staged a military response was, I think it was the Gambia, if I remember correctly. And there was a problem there. And of course, Gambia is a little fucking tiny ass nation that's basically just one river valley. The country itself is just a tiny river anyway. It isn't hard to overrun a country that's that size. But right now, Niger, of course, has been landlocked. They've been sanctioned. They no longer have port access. The borders have been shut. Their airspace has just been shut. They have no trade. At some point, people may riot there. And there aren't that many forces for the members of the military coup there. I mean, you're talking about 10,000 dudes right now. The French could have overrun them with a couple of special forces units. They're not well equipped, they're not well funded, and they don't have the greatest training. Pretty much most ECOWAS members, by and large, have small militaries. With the exception of Nigeria, and even to some degree, Ghana, they have a relatively advanced military and a well-funded, well-trained military for the continent of Africa. I think outside of Egypt. If I remember correctly, I think Nigeria is number 2 and Egypt is number 1. Nigeria has 250,000 troops available, although many of them are reservists. Niger, on the other hand, is not a very well-tuned military. They would be crushed within a week. Nigeria would kick the shit out of the military groups that have taken over Niger. They would decimate them. It wouldn't be even close. They probably wouldn't even take a day. If I were there, I'd be fucking shitting myself. If I had a force of 10,000 men and all of a sudden a force of 200,000 men comes who are well trained, well equipped, and well funded, I'd probably flee into exile. I'd go over to like Chad or Mali or something like that. Or I'd just stand down and say, okay, you know what? Party's over. We had our fun. And don't even get me started with Egypt. They're even more ridiculous. They got millions of men. Shit ton of tanks too, and a lot of drones, and they even have nukes. Egypt's got a really well-tuned military, by far the largest military on the continent. They probably would kick the shit out of the Israelis if they ever got really pissed at them. Having control over the Suez Canal and the Red Sea also helps as well. Anyway, you get the idea. Most ECOWAS members don't have well-tuned militaries. Do they want that conflict though? That's where the question marks are. As I said it before, an invasion does seem possible, but a war may or may not happen though. Because really, they're just using weasel words when you really think about it. They're saying, we will consider the use of force. We may use force. We may invade. We will consider all of the options available on the table, up to and including invading your country and declaring war. To me, what you're trying to say is, well, we might just sanction you. You know, you're a landlocked country, and if we blockade you, you're fucked economically. We'll just outlast you. And then a month later, maybe the rebels there will take control back in their country anyway, once and for all. Or we might just straight up invade. Or we may declare war on you. Or we may just do some targeted strikes. Maybe a drone strike here or there. This is, by the way, what the West is urging them to do. The West is saying, well, yeah, you gotta abide by that deadline. You know, the US, France, and even the UK are all big trade partners, especially with that Western bloc in Africa. For instance, Niger actually has provided France with a lot of uranium and other natural resources that France uses in their economy and in their society. Once again, this has been pretty typical of Africa over the last, century. A lot of their resources and natural goods have been used by the West, and then now you have, China with their big initiative. China has been making inroads in East Africa and that whole general Horn of Africa area for years. You know, they've been investing in infrastructure and things like that in countries like Somalia, Ethiopia, Djibouti, and Eritrea, so they can get their piece in the pie too. By the way, most of these countries in ECOWAS are West-aligned, other than a couple of suspended members that are finding themselves much more aligned with East Bloc states like Russia and China. Mali and Burkina Faso, for instance, come to mind, who are currently being occupied by their own respective military coups. Mali and Burkina Faso are the only two countries that are actually backing this military coup in Niger. But as far as that, Ivory Coast, Senegal sort of area, the United States and the West reigns generally supreme, especially within Nigeria. They got a lot of oil and other goods, and they're more wealthy than most of their neighbors for a reason. And Ghana has soccer players, and really good ones. So does Nigeria. Yunus Musa and Bukayo Saka, to name a few, both of which are of Nigerian and Ghanan descent. Anyway, most of ECOWAS, at least with the exception of the suspended members like Mali and Burkina Faso, are more aligned with the West. And much like with Mali and Burkina Faso, this military coup in Niger is not too friendly with the West. They don't really give a fuck about France. They don't really give a fuck about the US. In fact, they actually hate both the US and France in general. And they seem a little bit more aligned with Russia, and more particularly the Wagner Group, who has reportedly deployed their troops to Niger and would help protect the country against an ECOWAS invasion to oust the military coup. And so Niger has essentially openly told France to go fuck themselves, and they have essentially cut all of their communications, cut all of their trade ties, and cut everything that they have built with France, and have told them to just essentially fuck off and get the fuck out of the country. And the US, on the other hand, is trying to be like the middleman, the mediator, the diplomatic mediator, so to speak. And they're trying to be a little bit more of this kind of attitude of, hey, we'll just let ECOWAS handle it. This is what they normally typically do. And they have done this in the past before. I believe they also did this with Mali and Burkina Faso, if I remember correctly. Now, I really don't think that the United States is going to allow anything to happen that would go against their national security interests. As we all know, this is a country that has gotten involved in pretty much the vast majority of diplomatic issues for at least the past half century. And the very moment that US forces get fired upon, shit can go south real fucking quick. And I mean, it's not like the US has this history of being some country that just doesn't get involved. This is a country that has literally been doing this since the 50s. And sometimes even for the wrong reasons. Looking at you, George W. But there is a chance that the West will be involved to at least a certain degree. I don't want American troops involved or anything like that. In fact, I'm against any time when the US is involved in a war that they have no reason to be in. I will be protesting against it. And I don't think it's really going to be in that point anyway. But to say that the United States wouldn't logistically help with an invasion or wouldn't provide intelligence to ECOWAS, I really do not see that realistically happening. Now, if ECOWAS were to invade, if the West were to aid them, and the US somehow sends their troops over, it would be a very quick war. Wagner Group notwithstanding, as well as the aid from Mali and Burkina Faso, which I will get into, all that aside, I don't think it would be just like Ukraine, because you don't really have a lot of domestic forces to actually fight. And also, as I've stated this before numerous times, with the exception of Nigeria, most ECOWAS members have small and weak militaries anyway. So if the West were to intervene, it would be quick from that reason anyway. And most of the country is nothing but Sahara, so you're not fighting in there anyway. Only a small portion of that country and Chad and Mali and a few others in the other neighboring nations are actually arable and actually capable of being inhabited. So unless you want to move out into the middle of like some random cave in the middle of the hinterlands, sticking out of the side of the Sahara like a sore thumb, you're kind of limited in your combat operations to that area of the country that happens to be the closest to the ECOWAS states and can be invaded fairly quickly. If you somehow drive an opponent off into the desert, they're going to take massive attrition very quickly. Like, what are they gonna do? In the age of, like, air forces and drones and satellites and whatnot, they're going to, like, camp out like fucking nomads 700 years ago around the middle of the oasis and regroup and do a nice bunch of border raids or something like that? Yeah, with the modern military technology that we have, that's no longer really a thing. Like, here's the thing, it's not like a nation like in Iraq or in Afghanistan where there's, like, lots of mountains and cliffs and caves and whatnot, and all these geographical features that you can use and you're able to easily hide out. A lot of the country is really nothing more than just flat open desert. Sparsely populated. It's not inhabitable. There are a handful of, I guess, settlements and villages out there along with like dirt roads that to a series of oases, and that's literally all you have in more than half of the country of Niger. And then here's another problem you're gonna run into. There's actually some infighting going on within ECOWAS because countries such as Mali and Burkina Faso and even Guinea, these are the countries that have seen military coups in recent years. And for them, they're not going to sit there and watch as this military coup in Niger gets torn out and is ousted. They're going to support that military coup because Mali and Burkina Faso are military coups themselves. So if ECOWAS can go in and they can do this themselves and completely oust the coup in Niger, they can also do the same thing in Burkina Faso and these other countries too. Again, I've stated this so many times already. The military of some of these countries are not necessarily the strongest. They're pretty weak, so it wouldn't be too difficult anyway. Two of these military coups running the two countries of Mali and Burkina Faso probably make up more than, 500 men anyway combined. So this is why Mali and Burkina Faso are suspended members. These countries have actually fractured themselves from ECOWAS and have went against all of these other nation states, claiming that they will militarily defend the country of Niger, who is now under a military coup, which essentially means that ECOWAS now has multiple member states pledging the defense of this rogue, illegitimate military dictatorship that they are all getting ready to gang up and potentially invade. Now, as of currently, no one really knows what the next step from ECOWAS is. Are these countries going to invade? And will we see like a major African war happen? No one really knows that, but it could happen pretty much at any minute. I mean, these countries already said that this was what could happen. Again, this could be weasel words. And I mean, we're already at that point now where these countries that are subjected to these military coups, they're not just going to go away. It's not like, military dictators are just going to step away. It's going to end up in at least something, right? There's got to be some sort of action taken. Something's going to happen either way. And I am not ruling out a potential invasion. I believe, though, what you are most likely going to see is a situation where ECOWAS is like, look, the economy of Niger, other than uranium exports to France, is completely non-existent. They can't invade any of us. They don't have the troops. It would potentially, I mean, while crushing the actual military coup members would be quick, we can also do the same with Burkina Faso and Mali. We are easily capable of this. Then, on the other hand, you'll end up with a guerrilla campaign. You'll end up with like a few thousand of these dudes that essentially turn into terrorists. They could end up working with ISIS. They could end up working with Boko Haram, or even Al-Shabaab, or something like that. Hell, they can even go to Afghanistan and work with the Taliban. And that can create long-term, much bigger problems that spill into our own borders and make the situation even worse. Sit down at the table, let's talk. Time to do diplomacy. And certainly they probably can and will ask the US for help with that. They're definitely not going to ignore the issue. Because if you're ECOWAS, put yourself in ECOWAS's shoes. At this point, all of these countries in your union are falling subject to these military coups. The governments are breaking down. They're being overthrown by these military regimes. They're becoming much more authoritarian. The economic benefits are a lot worse because of all of this. All this really is doing is contributing, in their own eyes, to even more regional political instability. And in Africa, that political regional instability is exactly the reason why the continent is being held back. I mean, so many of these countries in Africa can't keep a stable government, and for that reason, can't really very sufficiently address the needs of the people there. Why do you think Sudan split into two different countries? Americans, unfortunately, fail to recognize why the entire continent is poor and completely unstable to begin with. They don't even remember Sudan splitting into two, even. A lot of people think that South Sudan always existed. I think I still have my old Earth globe that I used to play with as a kid that does not depict this particularly fairly new minted nation, which has more arable land but less energy resources, if I remember correctly, than the dry desert climate of its northern, more Islamic counterpart. South Sudan leans more west, and South Sudan is mostly rainforest. Interesting and underrated part of the world, again, which almost nobody even has any knowledge about, unless they're a geography nut or they study sociopolitics and diplomacy for their living, like I do. So in the perspective of ECOWAS, this is their opportunity to help provide some stability to that region, but at the same time, it could destabilize the whole region. Again, as I mentioned, if the West were to get involved, and these military coups are able to be ousted fairly quickly, who's to say some of these members don't become terrorists and they end up joining a terror group of some sort? And nobody wants to see the West involved in any wars anyway. All of this, to them, has been an issue traditionally viewed as something that they want to get away from. As a matter of fact, they pretty much very well could. At the end of the day, they're probably going to try to enforce their demands through blockades and sanctions, which will impoverish the people of Niger, turning them against the other nations, ripping them out of ECOWAS, just like they did with Mali and Burkina Faso, and putting them in the sphere of Russia, actually. I'm pretty sure this will make Putin really ecstatic for him hearing that. Russia has got to be happy with these proceedings, by the way. It's almost like a retaliation for what's happening in Ukraine at the moment, where they're still mostly stalled out. Although the Ukrainian counteroffensive hasn't really gone that far as of late, most of the fighting going on is concentrated in the Donbass region anyway, but that's a totally separate video. But yeah, it's quite frankly just a really terrible situation to watch. But this is one of the global significant major events that needs to be monitored. So as there are more updates coming along the way, I do plan to continue updating you guys with videos right here, because as always, I'm your news guy. This is what I do. So make sure you guys are subscribed and make sure you ring the bell for those noties, because we don't know what's going to happen next after this deadline has passed. So if you want to stay up to date, make sure you subscribe and turn those noties on. It's possible that they choose to invade this other country right after this video is uploaded. It's much more likely that they'll do what these other countries tend to do, which is threaten the possibility of the use of force by using weasel words as a way to get them to negotiate and do diplomacy. And the leader of that country is hopeful that that will happen. It's also possible that they're also successful and the military coup leaders there get like some of their demands met and they all just go home. Although once you've already ousted your president, your, democratically elected president, it's kind of pretty difficult just to go back to your normal day-to-day job as a general or something like that. Normally afterwards, there'd be a counter coup against these individuals and they would be jailed or even executed for treason. Maybe they'll bargain for like an exile in like Burkina Faso or something like that, and they'll end up joining their military endeavors. How even large is the Burkina Bay military? 3 dudes? Do they even have guns? What do they use for their weapons anyway? I got no fucking clue. I can find it on a map, and I know their capital is Ouagadougou, and this is what their flag looks like. But honestly, I really don't know anything further about that country. Hell, most people don't even know that it fucking exists. Half of them don't even know about Niger existing. I, on the other hand, can name and locate virtually all of the African nations. Very unfortunate, by the way. Geography is not particularly well taught in US schools, nor I think in European schools outside of European geography. Shame that there's not enough people that are interested. Geography is actually very fascinating. I love and enjoy geography. It used to be my favorite social studies subject. I used to have this interactive globe where you can tap on the countries with like a stylus and it tells you the name of the country and everything about it. That shit's my childhood. I used to come back from school and play with that globe almost all the time. And I try to memorize all the countries, capitals, biggest cities, currencies, highest points, mountain ranges, rivers, lakes, and so forth. Got pretty good at it. I can even recognize every single flag of every country, and I can still name all 195 countries to this day. So, I feel sorry for the people in Niger, although some of them do support the coup. Can't really blame them. The leader of the country did actually drag his feet on multiple reforms for an extended period of time, and at the same time, there are also thousands of other protesters who have taken to the streets in support of the detained president that was democratically elected. So there's a pretty good split on opinion inside of Niger anyway. It's almost like, you're going to be abused anyway. Do you want to be abused more by the local military bloc? Or by a president who supports foreign entity from another continent with at least more investment potential, who happens to be your former colonizer? Well, pick your poison, I guess. But with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed, be sure to hit that like button down below. And if you're new around here, be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the little notification bell. Be sure to follow me on all my social medias, links are in the description below. Share this video around with your friends, families, boyfriends, girlfriends, enemies, whomever. Definitely helps me out a lot, helps the video grow, and helps grow the channel if you can share this video with whomever you know. Don't forget to leave all your thoughts in the comment section down below, as I always end the conversation down to you. What do you think is going to happen next? Do you think a war will break out? Will ECOWAS invade Niger? Do you think Niger gets kicked out of ECOWAS? Will the US get involved in a potential West African war if it ever happens? As always, make sure you leave all your thoughts and predictions in the comment section down below. And don't forget to send me some feedback and improvement as to what should I do to improve the content here on the channel. Although I have been getting some haters on the comments lately. But big appreciation to everybody who sticks with me and stands by my side as per usual. Y'all are the real ones here, but anyways guys, like, subscribe, ring notifications, and until then, take care, talk soon, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.